The morning sun cast beautiful rainbow patterns through the crystal towers of Cytheria Prime, just like it had for the past 1,000 years. Children made of living crystal played in the gardens, while their parents tended to the singing flowers that grew in perfect harmony. The Cytherians had built their entire civilization around peace, beauty, and gentle living. Their weapons were so old they had turned into museum pieces. War was just a word in their history books, but that peaceful morning was about to become their last. The first sign of trouble came from the Outer Rim colonies. Communications suddenly went dark from the mining world of Christhaven. Then the agricultural planet of Shimmerdale stopped responding. Within hours, 3 entire star systems had gone completely silent. The Cytherian leadership gathered in their great council chamber, their crystal bodies glowing with worry and confusion. Elder Lyra, the oldest among them, had lived for 800 years and had never seen anything like this. "Send scout ships," she ordered with a trembling voice. "Find out what happened to our people." The scouts that returned brought news that froze the crystal blood in every Cytherian heart. They had found nothing, not destroyed planets or burning cities, but absolutely nothing. Where 3 thriving star systems used to exist, there was only empty space. It was as if something had eaten the very fabric of reality itself. Then the reports started coming in from the border worlds. Massive black shapes moving through space, consuming everything in their path. These weren't ships or machines, but living creatures the size of moons. They moved in swarms, devouring planets, stars, and even the space dust between them. Nothing satisfied their endless hunger. The Void Swarm had found the Cytherian Republic. The creatures moved with terrible purpose toward the heart of Cytherian space. Every world they touched simply vanished, consumed down to the last atom. Gentle crystal beings tried to fight back with their ancient defense satellites and forgotten weapons. But it was like trying to stop an ocean with a paper cup. The swarm didn't even slow down. Panic spread through the crystal cities faster than wildfire. Families huddled together as the news got worse by the hour. The great shield generators that protected their worlds flickered and failed one by one. The Cytherians had lived in peace for so long that they had forgotten how to fight, how to run, or how to die with dignity. Elder Lyra stood in the communication center, watching their civilization crumble on a dozen screens. Her crystal form had lost its usual glow and looked dull with despair. With shaking hands, she activated the galaxy-wide emergency broadcast system that hadn't been used in 5 centuries. "This is Cytherian Prime calling any and all vessels in range," her voice echoed across the stars. "We are under attack by unknown hostile forces. Our defenses have completely failed. We have millions of civilians who need immediate evacuation. Please, if anyone can hear this message, we desperately need humanitarian assistance. Send medical ships, evacuation vessels, anything you can spare. We are peaceful beings who have never harmed anyone. Please, someone help us." The message repeated over and over, bouncing from relay station to relay station across the galaxy. The Cytherians waited and prayed to their crystal gods, hoping that the Great Galactic Council would send their famous white hospital ships filled with doctors and supplies. They pictured gentle rescue teams arriving to carefully evacuate their people to safety. But deep in space, something else entirely had heard their call for help. The first ships to appear on their long range. Sensors weren't the clean white vessels of mercy they expected. Instead, massive dark warships emerged from hyperspace, their hulls scarred from countless battles. These ships belonged to a species that the galactic databases listed with a warning that made every Cytherian's crystal heart skip a beat. Species: human. Status: extinct. Homeworld: uninhabitable. Extreme: avoid all contact. The humans had been written off as dead by the galaxy centuries ago. Their home planet Earth was considered too violent and dangerous for any civilized species to survive. Yet here they were, very much alive, and heading straight for Cytherian space with the largest battle fleet anyone had ever seen. The crystal beings had called for angels of mercy, but instead they were about to meet the galaxy's most feared demons of war. Admiral Jake Morrison had seen plenty of dying worlds in his 30 years of military service. But watching the crystal cities of Cytheria Prime crack and shatter still made his jaw clench with anger. The beautiful rainbow towers that had taken centuries to grow were breaking apart like expensive glass ornaments dropped on concrete. Black smoke poured from the wounds where the void swarm had already begun their feast. Morrison stood with his hands clasped behind his back on the command deck of the Iron Will, humanity's largest battleship. His gray hair was cut military short, and his face carried the deep lines that came from making life-or-death decisions for decades. Around him, his crew worked with the quiet efficiency that marked Earth's finest soldiers. "Admiral, we're receiving transmissions from the planet's surface," announced Lieutenant Beth Collins from her communication station. Her fingers danced across the holographic controls as alien voices filled the bridge speakers. The Cytherian language sounded like wind chimes mixed with bell tones. Beautiful but desperate. The ship's translation computer worked overtime to convert the alien speech into English. "They're asking for our identification code, sir," Collins continued, frowning at her screens. "They want to know which Galactic Council member we represent. They're also requesting that we follow something called Standard Humanitarian Protocol. 7 and dock at their designated refugee processing stations." Morrison let out a short laugh that held no humor. "Processing stations?" He gestured toward the main viewing screen, where entire sections of the crystal world were going dark as the void swarm consumed them. "Collins, tell those crystal folks that we didn't travel halfway across the galaxy to fill out forms." "Sir, they're getting more insistent," Collins reported as new messages flooded in. "They're saying we need proper authorization before we can enter their airspace. They want us to coordinate with their emergency services and wait for official permission to begin rescue operations." The Admiral shook his head in disbelief. These aliens were about to be wiped out of existence, and they were worried about paperwork. It reminded him of the old joke about humans being the only species crazy enough to run toward danger while everyone else was running away from it. "Collins, open a channel to the entire fleet," Morrison ordered. His voice carried the authority of someone who had commanded respect from the toughest soldiers humanity had ever produced. "Channel open, sir," Collins confirmed. "All units, this is Admiral Morrison," he spoke into his headset microphone. "We've got a planet full of dying civilians below us, and an enemy that doesn't care about rules or protocols. I'm ordering immediate combat deployment. Launch all drop pods. Medical teams, engineering units, and combat support, get down there. Now, we'll sort out the politics later." The bridge erupted into controlled chaos as his orders were relayed throughout the fleet. Through the massive windows, Morrison watched as hundreds of small ships detached from the larger vessels. These drop pods looked like black metallic eggs as they streaked toward the planet's surface, leaving trails of fire in their wake. Down on Cytheria Prime, the crystal beings watched this display with growing terror. To them, it looked exactly like an invasion. Humans weren't sending down peaceful white shuttles marked with medical crosses. Instead, they were dropping what appeared to be military assault pods at high speed directly into active combat zones. "Elder," Lyra stood in the planetary command center, her crystal body flickering with fear and confusion. "They're not following any of our safety procedures," she whispered to her advisors. "Those ships are heading straight for the swarm-infected areas. No civilized species would do something so reckless." The Cytherians tried desperately to contact the human fleet, sending message after message requesting that they stop and coordinate their rescue efforts properly. They begged the humans to land at the safe zones they had prepared, to register their personnel, and to please follow the established emergency protocols that had kept the galaxy peaceful for thousands of years. But the humans weren't listening to their pleas for proper procedure. They were already on the ground. The sounds of war were echoing across the crystal world. When Admiral Morrison finally responded to the Cytherian leadership, his message was delivered with the blunt directness that had made Earth's military famous throughout human space. There were no diplomatic pleasantries or formal introductions. "Cytherian Command, this is Admiral Morrison of the Terran Fleet." His gravelly voice came through their speakers. "We received your distress signal about something eating your worlds. We're here to kill whatever's causing your problem. Keep your people away from the combat zones and let us work. Duh. The communication channel went dead, leaving the crystal beings staring at their speakers in shocked silence. They had called for mercy and humanitarian aid. Instead, they had received warriors who treated their dying world like a battlefield and their desperate situation like a target to eliminate. Captain Lisa Hayes crouched behind the wreckage of what used to be a beautiful crystal fountain, her rifle ready as she surveyed the nightmare that had once been a peaceful alien neighborhood. The streets were covered in thick black slime that moved and pulsed like it was alive. Broken crystal homes leaked strange green mist, and the air buzzed with the sound of creatures that definitely weren't supposed to exist on any civilized world. Her squad of Marines followed close behind, their boots crunching on crystal debris as they moved through the ruins. These weren't the polished soldiers you'd see in recruitment videos. They were scarred, tough men and women who had grown up on a world that tried to kill them every single day. Earth had hurricanes that could level entire cities, earthquakes that swallowed mountains, and wildlife that treated humans like a tasty snack. But that harsh upbringing had made them into something special. "Captain, we've got movement ahead," whispered Corporal Danny Rodriguez, pointing his scanner toward a collapsed crystal spire. "Big movement. Multiple contacts." Hayes nodded and hand-signaled her team to spread out. Below their feet, she could feel the ground vibrating as something massive approached. The Void Swarm creatures were coming, and from the sound of it, they were hungry. Deep underground, the surviving Catherians huddled in their emergency shelters, listening to the chaos above through their communication systems. Elder Vera clutched, her young grandson close to her crystal chest, both of them glowing dim with fear. "The humans will be consumed just like our defense forces," she whispered to the others in the shelter. "These creatures dissolve anything they touch. They spray acid that melts through our strongest barriers. No one can survive up there." The other crystal beings nodded sadly. They had watched their greatest warriors, beings who had trained for centuries, get torn apart by the swarm in mere minutes. These humans might be violent, but they were still made of flesh and blood. How could they possibly survive what had destroyed an entire civilization? Above ground, Sergeant Mike Thompson was about to show them exactly how wrong they were. "Contact front," he shouted with excitement, as a pack of swarm creatures the size of school buses came skittering around the corner. Their black carapaces gleamed with deadly slime, and their mouths dripped acid that hissed when it hit the ground. Each creature had dozens of claws designed to shred anything unlucky enough to get close. Thompson shouldered his plasma rifle and grinned like a kid on Christmas morning. "Finally." I was getting bored. The other Marines opened fire without hesitation, their weapons lighting up the ruined street with blazing energy bolts. But these weren't the careful, measured shots that Galactic military doctrine recommended. These were humans fighting like their lives depended on it, which they did. When the first swarm creature leaped at Private Kelly Morrison, she didn't retreat like military textbooks said she should. Instead, she rolled forward under its claws, came up behind it, and shoved a plasma grenade directly into what looked like its breathing hole. The explosion painted the crystal wall behind it with alien guts. "That's how we do it on Earth," Morrison whooped, already turning to engage the next target. The Catherians watching through their security cameras couldn't believe what they were seeing. These humans were fighting the unstoppable swarm creatures like they were having fun. Acid sprayed across their armor, they wiped it off and kept fighting. When claws raked across their shields, used the momentum to spin around and attack from a different angle. Dr. Amanda West was having the time of her life in her mobile research station, even as explosions shook the armored vehicle around her. While her colleagues back on Earth studied peaceful alien flowers, she got to dissect monsters that could dissolve titanium with their saliva. "This is incredible," she shouted over the sound of gunfire, peering at a swarm specimen through her microscope. "These creatures are like living weapons factories. Every part of their biology is designed to kill and consume." Her assistant, Technician Bobby Chen, ducked as another explosion rocked their vehicle. "Doc, maybe we should analyze them after we kill them all." Wes waved him off, too excited by her discovery to worry about minor things like being in the middle of a war zone. Look at this neural structure. It's like a biological computer network. They're all connected through some kind of electromagnetic field. She worked frantically at her equipment while Marines outside fought for their lives. Then suddenly, her eyes lit up with the kind of dangerous excitement that had made humanity famous across the galaxy for terrible ideas that somehow worked. "I've got it," she yelled, jumping up so fast she hit her head on the vehicle's ceiling. "Their entire nervous system runs on electromagnetic pulses. We can hack their biology. We can turn their own neural network into a weapon against them." Outside, Captain Hayes heard the news over her radio and smiled grimly. This was exactly why humans were considered the galaxy's craziest species. Where other races saw an unstoppable, a force of nature that had to be endured or fled from, humans saw a puzzle to solve and an enemy to defeat. The Void Swarm had made one critical mistake. They had attacked a species that had learned to thrive in hell itself. Commander David Stone kicked down the door of the crystal shelter, where dozens of Catherians huddled together like frightened children. His combat armor was scratched and dented from hours of fighting, and alien blood stained his helmet visor. The crystal beings cowered away from him, their bodies flickering with terror as they expected this savage human to harm them. Instead, Stone dumped a pile of modified tools and equipment on the shelter floor with a loud crash that made everyone jump. "All right, listen up," he barked in a voice that had commanded respect from the toughest soldiers in human space. "I know you're scared, but hiding down here isn't going to save you. Those things up there are going to break through these walls eventually, and when they do, you're all dead." Elder Kiraz, the shelter's appointed leader, stepped forward on trembling crystal legs. "Please, human warrior, we are not fighters. We are peaceful beings. We build things, we grow things, we create beauty. We don't know how to hurt anyone." Stone picked up one of the devices he'd brought and held it up for everyone to see. It looked like a crystal mining drill, but he had modified it with military-grade power cells and targeting systems. "See this? You've been using it to dig pretty holes in rocks for the past 1,000 years, he said, activating the device. It hummed with deadly energy. Just turned it into something that can punch through swarm armor like it's made of paper. Your mining equipment is already tougher than most species' weapons. You just never thought to point it at something that needed killing." The Catherians stared at their familiar tool in shock. They had never imagined using their peaceful mining equipment as weapons. The very idea went against everything their civilization stood for. "We don't know how to fight," whispered a young Catherian named Zara, her crystal body glowing pale with fear. Stone's expression softened just a little. "Nobody's born knowing how to fight, kid." "What? But you want to know? The difference between humans and every other species in this galaxy? When something tries to kill us, we don't just lie down and die pretty. We get angry and we get even." Outside the shelter, the sound of explosions and gunfire was getting closer. The swarm creatures were breaking through the human defensive lines, and soon they would be at the shelter doors. Corpsman Jennifer Clark was working frantically over a wounded Catherian in the corner of the shelter. Her medical tools spread out on the crystal floor. The injured alien had been caught in a swarm acid spray, and half of his crystal body was cracked and leaking vital fluids. "Hold still," Clark ordered, her hands steady despite the explosions, shaking dust from the ceiling above them. "I've performed surgery in worse conditions than this." The other Catherians watched in amazement as this human medic worked to save their friend, while the battle raged literally over their heads. They had expected these warriors to be mindless killers, but here was one of them risking her own life. To save a complete stranger from an alien species, Clark finished her work just as a massive explosion rocked the shelter, causing several crystal formations to crack. "There," she said, helping the wounded Catherian sit up. "You'll live, but you need to start moving. The shelter won't hold much longer." It's when Stone made his announcement that changed everything. "You want to live through this?" he shouted. "Over the increasing noise of battle, then stop hiding and start fighting. It's your planet, your rules, but we're teaching you how to win." He showed them how to hold the modified mining tools, how to aim them, and how to work together as a team instead of scattering in panic. The Catherians were clumsy at first, their peaceful nature making it hard to even think about violence. But as the shelter walls began to crack and the sound of swarm creatures grew louder, Survival instinct began to override their gentle programming. Above them in orbit, Captain Brian Lee was proving that human tactics didn't always follow the rulebook. His destroyer Relentless had taken heavy damage from swarm bioships. Creatures the size of city blocks that could regenerate from almost any wound. Standard galactic warfare doctrine said to retreat when facing such overwhelming odds. Lee had other ideas. "All hands, brace for ramming speed," he announced over the ship's communication system. His crew didn't question the order, even though what he was planning violated about a dozen interstellar warfare treaties. The Relentless accelerated directly toward the largest swarm bioship, its reinforced human hull glowing white-hot from the speed. The collision was spectacular, the destroyer cutting through the alien creature like a hot knife through butter. The bioship split in half, its severed pieces floating dead in space. Down on the planet's surface, Lieutenant Colonel Amy Foster was having similar success with tactics that would have made galactic military academies issue formal complaints. Her ground forces had run out of standard explosives hours ago, so they had started making their own from whatever they could find. "Is that legal?" asked one of her demolitions experts, as they prepared charges made from Catherian fertilizer and human fuel cells. Foster grinned as she set the timer. "Probably not, but it works. Clear the area." The explosion that followed cleared 3 city blocks of swarm creatures in one massive blast. It also probably violated 3 different warfare conventions indefinitely, broke several environmental protection laws, but it worked. The Catherians watching from their shelters couldn't believe what they were seeing. Their beautiful world was being systematically cleansed of the nightmare creatures, not through superior technology or overwhelming firepower, but through pure human stubbornness and a complete refusal to give up. These humans fought like their homeworld had taught them. To fight with creativity, determination, and a willingness to do whatever it took to protect the innocent. The morning sun rose over Catheria Prime for the first time in 3 weeks, without the shadow of death hanging over it. The crystal cities were cracked and scarred, their rainbow towers broken in places where the void swarm had tried to consume them. But they were still standing, and more importantly, they were still alive. Admiral Jake Morrison walked through the Great Crystal Palace, his heavy boots echoing in halls that had been built for beings much lighter than humans. The Catherian architects had designed everything to catch and reflect light in beautiful patterns, creating a living artwork that changed throughout the day. Even damaged, it was the most beautiful building Morrison had ever seen. But his mind wasn't on the architecture. Around him, human medics were still working to save wounded Catherians, their rough field medicine techniques somehow keeping the delicate crystal beings alive. Engineers were helping to repair the worst structural damage, and cleanup crews were disposing of the last swarm creature remains. The work was almost done. Soon it would be time to leave. Prime Minister Thera waited for him in the central chamber. Surrounded by the surviving members of the Catherian Council, her crystal body had lost some of its usual glow, dulled by weeks of fear and stress, but she was alive. They were all alive, which was more than anyone had expected when the swarm first arrived. "Admiral Morrison," she said, her voice carrying the musical tones that made Catherian speech sound like wind chimes. "We wanted to speak with you before your departure." Morrison nodded respectfully. Despite everything that had happened, he understood that these beings had been through hell, and they deserved answers. "We've been trying to understand what happened." Here Thera continued, her form shimmering with confusion. "When we sent out our distress call, we asked for humanitarian aid. We expected medical ships and evacuation vessels. We wanted doctors and relief supplies." She gestured toward the windows where human warships could be seen preparing to leave orbit. "Instead, you brought battleships and soldiers. You came with weapons designed to kill, not heal. You brought war to our peaceful world." The other council members murmured their agreement. They had spent 3 weeks watching humans fight with a brutality that went against everything their civilization stood for. They had seen these warriors use tactics that violated every rule of civilized warfare, weapons that were banned by galactic law, and strategies that prioritized victory over mercy. "Yet here we are," Thara said, her voice filled with wonder. Our world is saved. Our people are alive. The creatures that consumed 3-star systems are gone forever. Don't understand how this happened or why." Morrison was quiet for a long moment, looking out at his fleet. The ships were battered and scarred from the fighting. The Iron Will had a massive gash in her hull where a swarm bioship had tried to ram her. The destroyer Vengeance was missing half her weapon systems. Every vessel in the fleet carried the marks of battle. More importantly, they carried the memory of friends who hadn't made it home. "You called for help," Morrison finally said, his voice carrying the weight of 30 years of military service. "When someone calls for help, we answer. That's what humans do. But why did you choose to fight instead of evacuate?" asked Councilmember Vex, his crystal form pulsing with curiosity. "Every other species would have tried to save who they could and retreat. You could have loaded your ships with refugees and left us to die. Captain Lisa Hayes chose that moment to enter the chamber, her combat armor still stained with the black eye core of dead swarm creatures. She had been leading the final cleanup operations, making sure no trace of the creatures remained to threaten the Catharians later. "Because running away doesn't solve the problem," Hayes said bluntly. "These things would have just kept growing. Kept spreading until they found something else to eat. Maybe our worlds. Maybe yours again. After you're rebuilt. We don't do half measures when innocent people are dying." She looked directly at Prime Minister Thara. "What you asked for mercy, but what you really needed was justice. Someone had to make sure those creatures could never hurt anyone again." The Catharians exchanged glances, their crystal bodies flickering with emotions that humans couldn't fully understand. For beings who had known only peace for millennia, the concept of protective violence was almost impossible to grasp. "We're still confused," Thara admitted. "Your species was listed in our databases as extinct. Your homeworld was marked as uninhabitable. How did you survive? How did you become so effective at war?" Morrison allowed himself a small smile. "Our planet tried to kill us every single day for millions of years. Earthquakes, volcanoes, hurricanes, ice ages, diseases, predators that hunted us for sport. We learned to fight back or die. That's what made us human." He turned to face the entire Catharian Council. "The galaxy is full of things that want to hurt innocent people. Most species run, hide, or hope someone else will solve their problems. We decided a long time ago that we'd rather be the ones doing the protecting." As the human fleet prepared to depart, the Catharians gathered to watch from their crystal observation decks. The scarred warships slowly turned away from their world, their engines lighting up as they prepared to jump back into hyperspace in the Planetary Database Center. Technician Mora was updating their galactic records. Next to the entry for species, human, she changed the status from extinct, avoid, to active, allied. Then she added a new note. "Will respond to distress calls with overwhelming force. Recommend immediate contact in case of existential threats." Human ships disappeared one by one into the darkness of space, ready to answer the next call for help from somewhere in the galaxy. Because in a universe full of predators and monsters, someone had to be the bigger monster that protected everyone else. The Catharians had learned that sometimes mercy came wearing armor and carrying weapons, and sometimes the scariest thing in the galaxy was exactly what you needed to keep the nightmares away.